The first time she screamed that I didn't belong there, the entire street went silent. Lawnmowers shut off, garage doors stopped halfway up, and people who had spent years pretending not to notice neighborhood drama suddenly found themselves staring straight at it. The strange part wasn't that she was yelling. The strange part was that she honestly believed she had the right to. Now, if you'd driven through Maple Creek Estates back then, you probably would have thought it looked like a postcard. Perfect lawns, matching mailboxes, the kind of neighborhood where every flower bed seemed to bloom on schedule and every trash can disappear from the curb before most people finish breakfast. Some folks love places like that. Me, they make me nervous. That's probably why I bought the little brick house sitting just outside the subdivision. Not inside it, outside it. That detail matters. The property sat across a narrow county road that most people barely noticed. On one side was Maple Creek Estates, controlled by one of the strictest homeowners associations in the county. On the other side sat my house, technically part of an older unincorporated district that had never been absorbed into the HOA. To most people, that road was just pavement. To me, it was freedom. I wasn't looking for luxury when I found the place. The shutters were faded. The grass looked exhausted. The porch leaned just enough to make you wonder if it had given up caring years ago. But the second I looked at the parcel map, I knew I wanted it. Because nobody could tell me what color to paint it. Nobody could find me because my truck wasn't pretty enough. Nobody could measure my grass with a ruler and pretend it was somehow a moral issue. That probably sounds dramatic, but I grew up around people who treated HOA rules like sacred scripture. My father used a joke that some neighborhoods spent more time policing lawn edges than solving actual problems. Back then I laughed. As an adult, I realized he wasn't entirely joking. So when I signed those closing papers, it felt less like buying a house and more like planting a flag. For exactly 2 hours, everything was perfect. Then she showed up. I was unloading boxes from a rental truck when I heard heels clicking across pavement. Not ordinary footsteps either. These were deliberate. The kind of footsteps that announce authority before words ever arrive. I turned around and saw a woman walking toward me with the confidence of someone who had never once questioned whether she belonged in charge. Her name, I would soon learn, was Patricia Whitmore. Tall, immaculately dressed, blonde hair that somehow remained perfect despite the August humidity. Expensive sunglasses, a smile that looked practiced enough to have its own rehearsal schedule. She stopped beside the truck and extended a hand. "Welcome to Maple Creek Estates." I shook it. "Actually," I said, "I don't think I live in Maple Creek Estates." The smile flickered for half a second. "I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the Homeowners Association." There it was. Not hello. Not congratulations on the new house. Not nice to meet you. Straight to the title. I should have known right then what kind of story this was going to become. Patricia immediately launched into a speech that sounded like she'd given it 100 times before. Approved paint colors, landscaping requirements, parking regulations, architectural review procedures. She talked while I stood there holding a box full of kitchen supplies, wondering whether she had even noticed I hadn't unpacked a single plate yet. Finally, I interrupted. "Patricia, I appreciate it, but this property isn't under HOA jurisdiction." Silence, just for a second. Then came a laugh. Short, sharp, dismissive. "That's impossible." I pointed toward the road. "No, it's actually very possible." She removed her sunglasses and looked at me for the first time. Not as a new neighbor, as a problem. I explained the county records, the parcel boundaries, the annexation history. Every word seemed to irritate her more. When I finished, she crossed her arms. "Well, it should be part of Maple Creek." That sentence stuck with me. Not because it was angry, because it was revealing. She wasn't arguing about facts. She was arguing about ownership, about control, about a reality she preferred over the one that existed. I smiled politely. Fortunately, county maps don't work on opinions. For the first time, the friendliness disappeared completely. Her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowed, and I watched something shift behind them. Not confusion, not disappointment, determination, the kind that says this conversation isn't over. She turned and walked back toward the subdivision without another word. Halfway across the street, she pulled out her phone. I remember standing there in the driveway, watching her disappear between two perfectly maintained houses and thinking the same thing any reasonable person would have thought. Well, that probably won't be the last time I see her. What I didn't realize was that Patricia Whitmore had just encountered something she hated more than rule breakers. Someone she couldn't control. As it turned out, I was right. I saw Patricia again the very next morning. And the morning after that. And the morning after that. At first, it was almost funny. Every day, I'd open my mailbox and find another packet waiting for me. Sometimes it was HOA bylaws. Sometimes landscaping standards. Sometimes parking regulations highlighted in bright yellow marker like she was assigning homework. The first few times, I tossed them straight into the recycling bin. Then I started keeping them. Not because I needed them, because the growing stack was becoming entertaining. By the end of the month, I had enough unsolicited HOA paperwork to stop a small caliber bullet. The strange thing was that Patricia never seemed to understand the basic issue. She wasn't dealing with a resident refusing to comply. She was dealing with someone who legally didn't have to. Those are very different battles. One afternoon, I was planting shrubs along my fence line when she arrived with two board members trailing behind her. The trio marched across the street like they were conducting an inspection. No greeting, no small talk, no pretending anymore. Patricia pointed directly at the newly planted shrubs. Those aren't approved. I looked at the bushes, then at her, then back at the bushes. Good thing approval isn't required. One of the board members shifted awkwardly. The others stared at the ground. Patricia's face tightened. You think this is amusing? A little. This neighborhood maintains standards. This isn't your neighborhood. The silence afterward was almost painful. The board members looked like they desperately wanted to be somewhere else. Finally, one of them, a gray-haired man named Leonard, cleared his throat. Maybe you could voluntarily join the association. I actually laughed. Not fake laughter. Real laughter. The kind you can't stop. Let me get this straight, I said. You want me to pay dues to people who already dislike me? Leonard immediately regretted speaking. Patricia didn't. She stepped closer. Close enough that I could smell expensive perfume. You won't last here. I remember looking directly into her eyes. Not angry. Not intimidated. Just curious. Because people usually make threats when they have leverage. Patricia didn't. She only had certainty. And certainty can be dangerous. Especially when reality refuses to cooperate. Over the next few weeks, things started changing. Small things at first. Subtle things. The kind designed to make you question whether they were intentional. One morning, I found lawn clippings scattered across my front porch. Another morning, my trash can was sitting in the middle of the road. A few days later, someone used sidewalk chalk to write "Join US" or leave across my driveway. Childish. Petty. Annoying. But calculated. Because none of it was serious enough to call the police. It was death by 1,000 cuts. The funny thing is they completely misjudged me. Because every attempt to pressure me had the opposite effect. I painted my shutters dark green. Not because I planned to. Because I knew Patricia would hate it. Then I built a fire pit. Nothing extravagant. Just a simple stone circle with a few Adirondack chairs around it. The following weekend, I parked my old pickup truck right in the driveway. The truck wasn't ugly, but it definitely wasn't HOA brochure material. Each decision felt like a tiny declaration. A reminder. This property belonged to me. Not a committee. Not a board. Not Patricia Whitmore. Me. Around that time, I started noticing something interesting. The neighbors. At first, most of them avoided me. Not openly. Just cautiously. Like people trying not to get involved. But little cracks started appearing. Away from across the street. A longer conversation at the mailbox. A few knowing smiles when Patricia wasn't around. One evening, a guy named Russell stopped while I was working in the garage. Russell lived 3 houses in a Maple Creek. Big guy. Retired firefighter. Looked like he'd spent most of his life lifting things heavier than me. He nodded toward Patricia's house. She's been talking about you at every board meeting. I laughed. Should I feel honored? Honestly, he shook his head. I think she's obsessed. Then he lowered his voice. You know, most people don't actually care what color your shutters are, right? That conversation stayed with me because I'd started realizing something. Patricia wasn't protecting property values. At least not entirely. This was personal now. Every challenge to her authority felt like an attack. and every reminder that she lacked jurisdiction felt unbearable. The explosion came on a Saturday, a hot day near the end of summer. I was cleaning my grill before a small cookout. Nothing special. A few neighbors, some burgers, cold beer, the kind of ordinary afternoon people dream about when they buy a house. I was scrubbing the grates when I heard shouting. At first I couldn't make out the words. Then I looked up. Patricia was crossing the street. Fast. No sunglasses. No polished smile. No carefully managed image. Just anger. Pure anger. You can't live here. The words echoed through the neighborhood. I froze. Everyone froze. Garage doors stopped moving. Conversations ended. A basketball bounced once and rolled away. Patricia pointed directly at me. This community is not for people like you. The sentence hung in the air. Heavy, ugly, dangerous. I slowly set down the grill brush. Then I walked to the edge of my lawn. I wasn't going to match her volume. People lose control when they want power. People stay calm when they already have it. Patricia, I said quietly, this is my home. You don't respect the community. I respect property rights. You undermine everything we're trying to build. No, Ivovia. I just refuse to pretend you own land you don't own. That hit harder than yelling ever could. Her face turned crimson. She pointed a shaking finger toward me. I'll call the county. Okay. I'll call attorneys. Okay. I'll call anyone I have to. I shrugged. Good luck. For a moment, I thought she might actually keep screaming. Instead, she made this frustrated sound that barely sounded human, spun around, and stormed back toward her house. Her front door slammed so hard that several nearby birds launched out of a tree. Nobody moved for a few seconds. Then life slowly restarted. The basketball rolled again. Garage doors continued opening. Conversations resumed. But something had changed. The entire neighborhood had witnessed it. The mask was gone. The reasonable HOA president image she'd spent years building had cracked right down the middle. And once people see what's behind the curtain, it's very hard to make them forget. What I didn't know was that Patricia wasn't finished. Not even close. Because 2 months later, she would make the biggest mistake of the entire conflict and accidentally hand me exactly what I needed to end it for good. 2 months later, the letter arrived. I almost didn't open it. At first glance, it looked official enough. Thick envelope. Association letterhead. Formal language printed across the front. The kind of thing designed to make your stomach tighten before you've even read the first sentence. I stood on my porch, opened it, and started reading. Then I started laughing. Not because it was funny, because it was desperate. The letter accused me of violating community standards. Anunciações de exterior modificações. Improper vehicle storage. Unapproved landscaping. Fire pit installation without review. Half the accusations didn't even apply to my property. The other half applied to rules I wasn't legally bound by. Then I reached the bottom. $200 per day in fines until compliance. I actually looked around to make sure this wasn't some kind of joke. It wasn't. Patricia had officially crossed from annoying into reckless. About an hour later, I drove to the county administration office. The woman behind the counter looked like she'd spent 20 years dealing with disputes between neighbors. The kind of person who could probably predict the entire conversation before it started. I handed her the letter. She read it, raised an eyebrow, read it again, then laughed. Not politely, not professionally, a real laugh. The kind you hear when someone has just confirmed exactly what they suspected. They sent this to you? Apparently. She flipped through several pages. They don't have authority over this parcel. I know. They know that too. I know that. That earned another laugh. Then her expression changed slightly. More serious. If they continue contacting you like this, you may have grounds for harassment. Harassment. That word followed me all the way home. Because until then, I'd viewed Patricia as irritating, controlling, overbearing. But harassment was different. Harassment meant consequences. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with county records spread around me. Property maps, boundary documents, legal references, correspondence dates. I spent 3 hours putting together a response. No insults, no sarcasm, no emotional speeches. Just facts. Cold, boring, undeniable facts. I explained the property's legal status. I referenced county records. I cited applicable statutes. I documented previous attempts to impose HOA authority where none existed. Then I ended with a single sentence in bold. Any further attempts to enforce HOA restrictions against this property will result in immediate legal action. Simple, clear, final. The next morning I walked across the street and placed the envelope in Patricia's mailbox. Then I waited. That evening I was sitting on my porch with a glass of iced tea when she got home. I watched her collect the mail, watched her open the envelope, watched her begin reading. Even from across the street, I could see it happening. The confidence faded first. Then the color left her face. Then it came rushing back. Bright red. She reached the last page. Stopped. Read again. Crumpled part of the letter. Uncrumpled it. Read a third time. Then disappeared inside. A second later, her front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. And just like that, everything stopped. The flyers disappeared. The complaints disappeared. The mysterious lawn clippings disappeared. No more inspections. No more threats. No more attempts to invent authority where none existed. The silence felt strange at first, like standing outside after a storm and realizing the thunder is finally gone. Life settled into something normal. I planted tomatoes along the fence, built a small storage shed, hosted cookouts, spent evenings around the fire pit with neighbors who gradually stopped acting nervous whenever Patricia's name came up. One night, Russell sat across from me watching sparks drift into the dark sky. "You know something?" he said. "What?" "I think you broke her." I laughed. "No, seriously." He pointed across the street. Nobody's ever pushed back. That was the part one hadn't understood at the beginning. Most people weren't afraid of Patricia. They were tired. There is a difference. Fear makes people run. Exhaustion makes people surrender. For years, she'd won simply because arguing wasn't worth the energy. Then someone showed up who wasn't interested in playing along. A few months later, another neighbor named Claire stayed behind after a barbecue while everyone else headed home. We sat around the dying fire, listening to crickets. After a long silence, she said something that stuck with me. I wish I'd stood up to her years ago. I looked at the glowing embers. Honestly, I didn't know what to say, because I hadn't fought Patricia for some grand principle. I hadn't arrived intending to liberate a neighborhood. I pushed back because I wanted to be left alone. That's it. But somewhere along the way, the conflict became about something bigger. Boundaries. The invisible lines people draw around their lives. The places where someone else's authority is supposed to end. Patricia never understood that distinction. In her mind, order justified everything. Rules justified everything. Control justified everything. The problem is that control, without consent, eventually becomes something else. Something uglier. And deep down, I think even she knew it. By spring, Maple Creek felt different. Kids stayed outside longer. Neighbors lingered in driveways. People laughed more. The tension that used to hang over the street had loosened somehow. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Then came a surprise nobody expected. One evening, Russell walked over carrying 2 beers. He handed me one and nodded toward Patricia's house. She sold it. I blinked. What? Closed last week. I stared across the street. The blinds were open. The driveway was empty. For a moment, I didn't know how to feel. Victory wasn't the right word. Relief wasn't either. Mostly I felt thoughtful. Because love her or hate her, Patricia had shaped this chapter of my life. Russell took a sip of his beer. The next owners won't know any of this history. I laughed. Probably for the best. He smiled. They'll just know you as the guy with the fire pit. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone outside long after midnight. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. Across the street, Patricia's old house sat dark and quiet. No one watching from behind the blinds. No one measuring. No one policing. Just another house waiting for someone new. And, sitting there in the silence, I realized something. This story was never really about an HOA. It wasn't about landscaping rules or parking regulations or paint colors. It was about what happens when someone mistakes authority for ownership. When they start believing that influence gives them the right to control people who never agreed to be controlled. Maybe some of you listening think Patricia was right. Maybe communities need strict standards. Maybe property values matter more than personal freedom. Honestly, I understand that argument. But there's a difference between protecting a neighborhood and trying to dominate one. And I think that line matters. So now I'm curious where you stand. Was I right to push back? Should I have ignored the conflict and kept the peace? Have you ever dealt with an HOA, a neighbor, a boss, or anyone else who pushed their authority too far? Did you stand your ground? Or did you decide it wasn't worth the fight? Let me know in the comments, because stories like this always split people right down the middle. And if this one reminded you of a time when you had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do isn't fighting harder. Sometimes it's simply refusing to move.